Okay, next let's take a look at placing the EQ as a main EQ for the whole front of house system. Okay, so what we're going to do is let's just move this EQ insert out of the group insert, and we're going to move it over to the main output insert. Okay, and we're going to, in this example, we're going to use left. Okay, as you can tell, we've got some signal coming in on the channel. And looking up at the EQ, we've got a signal coming in on the EQ. As you notice here, the EQ is flat, which is what we want. But what's different here in running the front of house is we don't have any meters, no action on the meters. And in looking at these sliders, our slider position's all the way down. But yet, we have a signal coming in off the main front house mix. Okay, this is probably the preferred method of placing an EQ into the front of house mix, because the EQ settings and the level of the EQ are completely independent of what we have on the slider. So basically, the quality of the signal that's coming through and the level of the signal that's coming through will not change based upon what our main slider is. So what this means is that as we move the slider up and down on the main front of house mix, we're not really affecting anything that's taking place with the EQ. The front of house is using the benefit of having EQ. Because if we were to move the slider up and down, this would greatly alter how the EQ functions when we're using it as an inline EQ. So now we're going to take a look at inserting this EQ as an inline EQ. Okay, so to insert the EQ as an inline EQ, we're just going to remove this because we won't need this anymore. And so what we're going to do is we're going to connect into the output. And as I said before, we're just going to use the left output for this. So we're going to take this cable, the other side of this cable, and we're going to connect it into the input of the EQ. Sorry, let me get some light on here. Okay, let's just remove that. So, well, let's see here. There we go. So what we're going to do is, there we go. Okay, so that's coming from the board. That's going to the input. Okay, and now what we're going to do is connect another cable here. This is on the output. Let's see here. You can see right there, that's on the output. Okay, and this output we just connected, the other end of that is going to connect into, we can run it directly to an amplifier, or we can run it directly into a crossover. But the thing to take away from this is that this EQ is now in line with the main output of the board. So the signal path goes from the front of house board into this EQ and then out of the EQ either into an amplifier or a crossover. The EQ is no longer in place as an insert. It's now in place as an inline EQ. Okay, so back to the board. As you can tell, we've got a signal coming in. It's coming in good and strong. Now, if we pan up and let's take a look at the EQ, there's no activity taking place on the EQ. And if we pan down, let's take a look at the board. We have nothing on the board, and because our sliders are down. So for anything to wind up on the EQ, so for anything to wind up there on the EQ, on that very top channel, we need to we need to increase the main front of house output. So we're just going to slide this up. Now, as you notice there at the top, we've got the meters working, which means we got output. Now let's take a look up here at the EQ, and there's our output. Now, the problem with inserting an EQ in an inline fashion is that as we make changes on the main front of house, I just brought it down a little bit, we've lost our EQ. Now as I increase it a little bit, then our EQ comes in. So the problem with this is that when we make small adjustments or minor adjustments on the main front of house mix, the whole properties of the EQ are also affected, which means if you had your EQ set, you know, maybe a little bit of a cut here on this frequency, maybe a little bit of a, say, maybe a little bit of a boost on a higher frequency, well, those settings are going to change on the EQ because it's not receiving that loud of a signal as it did before when you set it. So when you make these small adjustments on the main front of house mix, now I just brought this down some, but you can tell now the whole properties of the EQ has changed in how it's processing the signal that's coming into it. So an inline, putting an EQ in line is probably not the best place for an EQ. However, if you do not have an insert capability on your board, then an inline EQ really is your only option. So if you have to do an inline EQ, you really need to maybe set the settings on it on the EQ so that they're not as loud as they could be. You need to allow yourself some room to be able to adjust the EQ as you make some minor adjustments on the main front of house mix. The main thing to take away from having an EQ on the front of house is that the small changes that you make here will mean big change for the overall quality of the front of house sound. And especially in front of house, you do not want to be doing anything like this. As I said before in the first part of the video, this is not a stereo. You're not EQing a stereo. You're doing live sound. And this EQ said should only be used as a tool to help control the sound. If you have a problem and you need more bass, then the problem is probably with the bass rig. If you need more kick or more snare sound out of the drum kit, the problem is with the drum kit. The problem is more than likely not going to be anything related to the overall sound quality. If anything, any kind of adjustments that are usually made are to take away certain frequencies. And this is just as an example here. I'm just pulling some frequencies down. You may have a little bit of front of house feedback, or feedback caused by front of house sound. You may have to notch something out a little bit. But if you are adding anything to it, for instance bass, or if you're coming over here and adding it because it needs to sound brighter or sharper, this is not the fix. This will actually probably at some point be tragic because it could cause damage to your speakers. Okay, so with our EQ inserted back into the front of house mix, as you can tell we got a signal coming in there, inserted back into the front of house as an insert, we've got a signal coming through, you can tell, and if we look down here at the board, we don't have anything going here for the output, and our slider is all the way down. So, like what I was saying, running an EQ as an insert instead of inline provides a lot better control and functionality. So I've been adjusting, as talking here, I've been adjusting the main front of house mix up and down, and there's been no other changes taking place with the EQ other than what it's currently processing. So it doesn't matter. Now we've got it tilted up. Oh, there we go. Front of house is up. We've got a signal coming through. And we still have a signal coming through here. Now I'm going to pan front of house down. I just did that. Still got a signal. If you notice, no lights, and front of house is down. So the properties of the EQ haven't changed. So for control, this is the best way to run an EQ.